As you listen, keep in mind that though this podcast features medical and other professionals and regularly speaks on the topic of psychoactive substances in a positive light, nothing heard here should ever be taken as medical advice or as encouragement to consume any of the substances mentioned, especially the ones that are blatantly illegal in your country of residence. Listen critically and always check in with yourself before acting based on anything you hear or read on the internet. Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of ATTMind Radio. I am your host as always, James W. Gesso, and just like every episode, I am excited to bring you this week's guest. Now, before we get into that, I would just like to express that there is a new essay released online by me through Collective Evolution that talks about it talks about psilocybin self-guided psychotherapy, but in majority it talks about trauma-focused therapy and how it is that we come to develop trauma, what trauma is, and how we can process through it, as well as just healthy ways to deal with emotions. So it's kind of like a psychology sandwich where the bread, though essential, only exists on the front, and the end is made of psilocybin, though you won't get high eating it. You might actually get high reading it. I don't know. I haven't really perfected that magic yet, but possibly I did it with this article. Time will tell. Okay, round 3. Kym Chi is a dedicated advocate of Earth stewardship, people care, and regenerative action for future resiliency. Deeply inspired by nature, art, and experiential education, her main efforts are as a creative facilitator, artist, gardener, healer, and community builder. Through her stewardship of a deepened connection with the natural environment, Kym wishes to inspire creative self-expression that enriches lives on a personal and universal level, creating healthy and abundant habitats and communities. With a belief that we have the ability to create the world that our hearts know is possible, she envisions the self-empowered creation of diverse and thriving communities and environments that exist harmoniously with the natural world. To date, Kym has received 3 certificates in permaculture design, completed 3 teacher trainings, taken a variety of advanced trainings, and most recently accomplished an advanced permaculture certificate with a focus on education. Kym teaches permaculture design courses, develops programming for people of all ages, creates open-source learning tools, and works for One Straw Society, a nonprofit focusing on food sovereignty and community resiliency on the Sunshine Coast. She also practices Reiki and is an aspiring visionary artist. Welcome to the show, Kym.
Hi, James.
Sorry about how many attempts it took me to get your bio out of my mouth.
That's okay. I've never heard it read before, so that was an interesting thing for me.
For the listeners, Kym and I have known each other for several years. Actually, I put Kym in my mind and in my heart as one of the people who played a primary role in the development of me as I am now, focused on myself as an entrepreneur and an educator and an author. And I deeply attribute a lot of what I've chosen to do with my life and inspiration that I shared with her while we lived in Calgary several years ago. And since the last time we saw each other, she's been up to some really awesome things. Now, in my mind, as I put people in certain roles, and pardon me that I do this, but we all do this, I put people in certain roles. In my mind, Kym sits as the person in my world that plays the role of the person I could go to if I ever have a question about gardening or permaculture or earth. She's, in my mind, my local personal permaculture specialist, like next level nature philosopher that I can reach to. And so I'm having her on the show here today to talk about permaculture and basically what all of that means for not just the development of gardens and food security, but the development actually of our entire society as an organism evolving within an ecology that we have long since wounded and need to work towards healing. So, Kym, to start off this interview, I'd like to ask you if you could give a rundown as to what permaculture is. Now, I mean this in the sense of if you were going to explain it. Now, I know you're an educator and you teach this to multiple levels. If you were to explain it to someone who's never heard of permaculture and kind of reference what the difference between permaculture and, say, traditional gardening or agriculture would be, and then we'll move to the deeper levels from there.
Okay, sounds good. So there's a few straightforward ways that you can define permaculture. I mean, there's hundreds of different definitions when you get into it. So that's what often complicates people's understanding and awareness of what permaculture is. But very simply put, I would say that permaculture is just the creation of whole systems. So it's like whole systems thinking. So we want to create sustainable or even better regenerative systems, and that can be related or expressed through gardening or agriculture, but also through the way that we create our communities, our governments, our economic system. So it filters through a multitude of different platforms. And I think that what really hones it in is that I always say it kind of the definition of permaculture lies within the ethics of permaculture, which are earth care, people care, and future care, or it's also known as fair share, that third one. And so those three ethics really are the foundations of the way that permaculture works and the way that we make our decisions when we're designing within permaculture systems. What makes it different than traditional gardening or agriculture is that, well, first and foremost, it's not only about gardening or agriculture. Like, you can't really take some of the practices of traditional agriculture and apply them to the government system, for example, or the economic system. Whereas in permaculture, you can take the principles and apply them to any system that exists. And it really is also about building and regenerating the earth and developing a relationship with nature, as opposed to, I feel personally that the traditional agricultural and gardening, it does connect you to nature, but it's more like a connection to nature through what is nature going to give me, and thinking about that quick return. Whereas in permaculture, we're thinking about what we can give back to nature and also how we can create a synergistic relationship with her or with it. So when we're doing our gardening or agriculture, for example, we're always thinking, okay, yes, what is this providing for me and my family and my community? But also, what is this providing to make the world better, to regenerate the earth, so that we can leave it in better condition for the future generations to come? Whereas the practices that are going on now are actually degenerating the earth and not allowing for it to flourish in the way that it once did.
You mentioned the three ethics of permaculture. Can you go into what each of those are? And just basically go into what each of those are.
Yeah, for sure. So we can start with earth care. And essentially, I will just preface this with, they seem really simple, the ethics, and they seem kind of like, oh, I learned this in kindergarten, like this is really easy to do. But it actually, when you get to the heart of it, it's quite challenging because we live in a society that's unethical, right? So we as individuals are striving to be as ethical as we can, but the society that we live in, at least in the Western culture, is inherently unethical. So when we look at something like earth care, for example, the goal is how can we become the most conscious stewards of the earth as possible, and how can we learn to take care of the planet in a way that helps it to be abundant and regenerative, like I've been mentioning. So one of the ways that I think about it is, For example, if we can learn to slow down and we can sit with nature and just be in the forest, or sitting by a tree if you live in the city, or in a park or by the river, and just allow ourselves to come back into that observation phase that all sustainable cultures once practiced, then we can really learn from nature and understand how to be in right relationship. So by simply listening to nature, we can actually understand how to take better care of it. And watching the way that nature does things, like if you go into an old growth forest and you actually just stand back and pay attention to what's happening, you can take what you see and what you learn and apply it to your own systems. So there's, you can go to there, or it's simply like starting to compost, or thinking of ways of building soil, or using reusable grocery bags, or things like that. So just really trying to have a focus on how we can take better care. And then we move into the people care aspect, which is about how can we learn to care more for each other. And this actually goes quite deep, because we might say, oh, well, I do that. I care for people. I take care of my family. I'm, good with my parents, with my friends, or maybe even with my local community. But it goes beyond that. We really want to think about the global community as well. So in all of the items that I purchase, were the workers paid fairly? Did the product come from an ethical source? What happened to Earth when we extracted those resources to create that particular product that I'm purchasing, kind of thing. So it's taking it to that next level, because most often people aren't being cared for in those processes, especially in the Western world. We're getting a lot of our stuff from developing countries, or countries where the work trade, the people are not being treated fairly, and there's a lot of unethical action happening. So it's just thinking about that. And then the third one, future care. The name future care comes from the African school of permaculture, but traditionally it's been taught as fair share, or Bill Mollison actually taught it as set limits to consumption and population, which is a little bit more controversial. We can leave it to Uncle Bill to be a little bit straightforward about things. But for me, the way of saying future care really holds it, because it's how can we think about the future generations and all of the decisions that we make. And in traditional cultures, it's often a minimum of 7 generations ahead of us. And sometimes in permaculture, we think, I want to make a 1,000-year plan, which is quite huge. And no, we can never really know what's going to happen in 1,000 years from now, or in 100 years from now, from the decisions that we make. But if we can hold that within ourselves when we're making design decisions, then there's just that much more of a chance that we're making the most conscious decision that we can make. And I always say, if we're holding the ethics in place, like if I'm caring for the earth and I'm caring for people in my decision that I'm making, then there's a good chance that I'm also caring for the future, right? Because hopefully when we're caring to that level and we're being that conscious in our interactions with nature and with the rest of the planet, then we're naturally going to be building a regenerative future. So those are the 3 ethics in a nutshell. And it really comes down to the way that we vote with our dollars. And this is kind of a Rosemary Morrow thing, where she calls it the ring of virtue, where you bring together all 3 of the ethics, and then you really consider, how am I voting ethically with my money? So whenever I spend my money in the production, distribution, and destruction of any product that I buy, is it caring for the earth? Is it caring for people? Is it caring for the future? So that's kind of the way that we can really take some deep action in the society that we live in now. And then I'll wrap up soon, but as a fourth, in Western Canada and in the US, we've brought in a 4th ethic, which is the transition ethic. And the transition ethic is really just that. So it's recognizing that in order for us to get to this regenerative culture that we kind of idealize in permaculture, that we have to sometimes use unsustainable means to get to a sustainable end. So, because a lot of the time living in these ethics can be quite daunting. I'm like, oh, but how can I actually be ethical? Because it's kind of impossible right now. But when we can say, oh, well, like what better use of the remaining oil than to put it into my earthworking machine and build a bunch of swales and develop my permaculture site, or, the leftover oil paint in my garage, instead of throwing it in the garbage, I'm going to use it and then buy eco paint next time, kind of thing. So it's just recognizing that we can't be perfect right now. We can only strive to be ethical beings. And this transition ethics is kind of there to help us with that and to show us how to be compassionate with ourselves and with each other. Because another piece of permaculture is pulling out all of that judgment of, like, I don't have the right to judge other people for their decisions. I can only lead in the way that I model. So, I started out by just being a regular whatever person who recycled my paper and my cans and bottles and whatever. And that was probably about the extent of it, and then moved from there to having a worm composting bin, to putting weights in my toilet, to living in my camper van, to, now living in a community and practicing permaculture in my everyday life quite deeply, steeped in the principles. So it's sort of just recognizing that it's not just something that happens overnight. And I can't look at someone else who is maybe where I was 5 years ago or 4 years ago and judge them, right? Like, I just have to keep doing what I do, and then hopefully they'll look at what I do and be inspired to continue to do the same thing. And then the same thing for me, as I learn, I can't judge myself. I can only do what I know, and I can only be as good as I know how to be in any moment. So, that was a lot.
Yeah, and a lot of really good points. In fact, near the end there, you actually started addressing one of my questions, which is that the idea of this what did I put down here? People care, and being really mindful of what you purchase, and thinking about where it comes from and how is it produced and how's it going to get put away. It can get really daunting, so extremely daunting, and especially in a culture where most of our behavior as basically domesticated animals, most of our behavior is controlled nowadays less through the threat of violence in our society, though we do have the threat of violence that comes from authoritative institutions threatening violence against us if we break crimes. But the majority of our behavior is being used through the intimidation of guilt and shame for being who we are, which we internalize through the social cultural conditioning of our early years given to us by our parents, who got it from their parents, who were all co-creating this really traumatized society together. And so when we think about, where did this come from and all this stuff, but I don't have the money to buy these larger products or these more expensive natural products, and so there's something wrong with me, or the guilt and shame becomes really internalized, and then either that guilt and shame starts to become externalized because the disparity between your behavior and how you feel about your behavior because of your conditioning becomes so charged that you start to externalize it through projection on others and do a lot of judging of others and their behavior, not so much looking at yourself. Or you use this guilt and shame to kind of come down on yourself so hard that eventually you need to, for care of self, dissociate from those feelings and just stop caring about it at all. So it becomes very, very difficult and daunting, given that our society is in such a kind of messed up place. And a lot, basically, if you're in a Western well-to-do society, unless you're kind of in those growing pockets where people are really focused on sustainability in the local culture and their relationship to that land that they're living in, pretty much everything that you buy is non-sustainable, right? We live in an entire society highly established on a linear, infinite growth, model. And so it can be quite difficult. So I like the piece that you offered there about you can only do your best. I mean, those weren't exactly your words, but I mean, it's the only, you can only do your best according to what's offered to you, and look at sometimes you have to do things that are slightly unsustainable if it means stepping towards more sustainable ends, which I think, you know, to lean into this old saying of you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, which is often misused in order to do things that are really just unjust to the all four of those ethics. It does make sense. Now, you talk about building and deepening our relationship to the earth, and I heard you make a little alteration in your terminology there from saying referring with a feminine pronoun to Mother Earth to a non-gendered pronoun, but I'll ask you maybe about that more later. Given that our society is where it is, in the regards to what I was just saying, and seeing what our normal or conventional farming agricultural practices are now, if you were to encapsulate the conventional paradigm for our treatment of the earth, what do you see that as being, and why did we get to this place, Kym? What is our relationship to our earth now, and why do you perceive us as having gotten to the place that we're in now? Like, what kind of trouble are we in?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I look at it from a couple of different perspectives. And one is that, you know, I think we're in some trouble. Like, I don't like to live from a fear-based place, but I feel like the trouble that we're in is not necessarily about the earth getting destroyed, more so our species getting destroyed. So I feel that no matter what happens, nature is going to thrive and continue to move on. And it's just that us as humans might not live through that. And that sounds kind of like harsh or whatever, but we have continually degraded the earth for I don't know how many years now, like since colonialism happened. And I think that colonialism is a big factor in our disconnection from nature and our relationship with nature, because I guess that's where I feel like we're at, is that we've become so disconnected from nature that we don't have that relationship anymore to the processes, to the cycles, to that stewardship that I talked about in the earth care. And that's why I felt it was so important to emphasize that just going and sitting and being with nature and being with the earth. Because I think some of the things that happened during colonialism, and I can really only speak to my own personal experience with my own disconnection from my culture, and also the observation of many people in my life and their disconnection from their culture, is that we were stripped away of all of our story. We were stripped away of all of our spirituality to a degree. That real, true earth spirituality, which is what most sustainable cultures practiced before colonialism came. And I'm not just talking about the Europeans coming here to Canada or to the States and colonizing the First Nations, but it's happened all over the world. And a dear friend of mine, Mark Lakeman, once told me a story, and it struck me. And I feel like in a way it struck me the same way it struck him, where he went and traveled to all of these different sustainable cultures all over the world, to all of these indigenous cultures. And he tells a story of one day sitting with a shaman and learning about colonialism. And he was in tears, and, you know, just, he was crying, and he was apologizing for what his people did to the other people and all of these things. And he tells the story of the shaman taking his hands to his face and holding his face and saying, the only reason why your people did this to my people is because it happened to you too. But it happened so long ago that you no longer remember. And that was like, whoa, right. That happened to my people too. Like I am from Druid and Celtic descent, right? And so the witch burnings and, you know, all of these different pieces, that was what happened to my culture. And that disconnection, that shame surrounding the practicing of earth spirituality, the shame of being connected to the earth in the first place, the whole idea that we have to be connected to this other kind of more structured and I don't want to say false God, but in a way like false God, or at least just the false way of connecting to God. And just the overall general practicing of our culture. And then we take now where we live in the Western society and we live in this like Roman colonialist grid that just is full of cement and continues to disconnect us from the planet and from each other too now. So we aren't even necessarily able to fully connect with each other. And then that's where the people care aspect comes into play. And we're missing that. So we're missing basically these foundations, these ethical foundations of permaculture are not embedded in our culture right now. And because we're so busy, you know, getting from point A to B on the cement pathway where we don't see a tree sometimes for some people might not see a tree for days at a time or touch a tree for days at a time. And that has caused us to lose sight. And now we're doing all of this degrading behavior, like the tar sands. You know, I can speak to that. There's all of this degrading stuff going on all over the planet, but I can speak to the tar sands because I'm from Alberta and I've been to Fort McMurray and I've seen what that has done to that place and to the people there. And I've watched the First Nations struggle to regain their right to the stewardship of the place that they knew as theirs and regain the right to practice their culture and what that process does to people. You know, it's yanking up. And this is why the people care thing, I'm just kind of weaving in a couple of your questions, but that's why the people care thing is so important, because what happens a lot of the time with permaculture is you're reconnecting to the planet. And I went through this process too. And you're reconnecting to your culture and to who you really truly are at your roots, at your ancestral roots. It can yank up. And that's a lot of this turmoil that people are feeling right now. Because I think whether we like it or not, we're kind of being pulled into this direction. You know, like 50,000 people in Calgary lost their jobs in the last few months. The buildings in downtown Calgary are emptying and becoming abandoned, right? Like it's turning into Detroit. And all of these unethical practices are kind of not being supported anymore. So we're kind of being forced to this reconnection, and it pulls up all of this kind of yucky stuff inside of us where we have to sort of face what we've done ourselves, right? Like, oh, I did all these different practices when I was younger because I didn't know, right? And I didn't feel that connection. So it's kind of facing that and trying to be really compassionate with myself as I go through that, but also facing what my ancestry has been through, whether it was colonizing other cultures or whether it was being colonized themselves, and kind of dealing with that. And then the more connected that we get to the planet, the more we feel and understand what's happening. And the more that we feel the suffering. And so that's not always easy to hold. But then what really gets me through that is that sort of community that I've embedded myself in, and just the knowing and the knowing what the right action is to take and doing it at all costs, and just being really vigilant in that, I guess. And just like really making sure that I'm not wavering. And no, I'm not perfect. And yes, I still sometimes make unethical choices because there's not necessarily another choice to make right at this moment. But I know that I am at the core of my being these ethics are like embedded in who I am now. And so with all of that sort of sadness and suffering and feeling of the planet's degradation is this other sort of like light that shows me that I'm just going to do this. And I'm not doing it because I'm afraid, and I'm not doing it because the world is fucked, excuse my language. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and because it makes me feel happy. And it's like having that reconnection to myself, that reconnection to the planet, and that reconnection to my community makes me feel great. And it's what I love, and it's what fuels me in my day-to-day. And I think if we all could kind of have that reconnection and get through some of that like nitty-gritty stuff with support of others around us, and that's a key piece in this people care, is making sure that there's supportive organizations and groups and people around to help through the process. In transition, we call it the inner transition. Through the inner transition, then you can, I think most people would find that love again. And it's not just through gardening or farming, you know, but it's through the sharing of whatever gift is inside of each person through that connection that they have.
I like I like this premise that of the shaman holding this man's head and saying, your culture only did it to us because it was done to you. One of the previous episodes with Dr. Devin Christie talked a lot about trauma-focused therapy, and we spoke at some point about how trauma is in us in the way that we're treated, and we're looking at more of isolated to what we would say like is the psychosocial stuff without necessarily touching in on earth or on the nature. But this trauma is in us because it was given to our parents. It was done to our parents, or at least experiences were put into our parents, which then logged as certain traumatic behaviors that then caused a repeat of those same traumas when they were working with us as their children. Mm-hmm. And that this continues on in this way. And so we talk about how not only is it 7 generations after us that we should be keeping into consideration in regards to our actions, but also that 7 generations behind us, we're dealing with right now. I mean, yeah, we're dealing with right now what's left over from 7 generations behind us. Now, biologically, we look at that like epigenetics. So inside of our genetic potentials are the wounds and traumas left over from a long time. And it plays out not only in the form of the behavior that we have towards others and towards children, but stays logged as potentials for how we'll behave when faced with certain experiences. And that if we don't choose to face these things, say the dark emotions or the uncomfortable emotions that come up when we've come to face and acknowledge how hurt we've been, and how we take accountability for that hurt, right? But we don't necessarily evade keeping other people responsible for their actions, but we take accountability for that hurt in the recognition that we were only hurt by that person because that person was hurt by somebody else, right? And I like to think about, even just last night, I was having a conversation with somebody about a park here in Kitchener-Waterloo that several years ago, a person was stabbed in that park during a Victoria Day fireworks celebration. I don't think they even do the celebration anymore. They did it for years and years, and then they just stopped because this person was murdered, and a bunch of investigations into gangs in this area came up, and I think it has since pretty much eliminated the majority of the gang problem that existed here previously. But I was walking through Waterloo Park with a friend, and I said, you know what, I kind of like this park better. I feel safe to walk around at night. And without thinking about this past experience or this past historical event, I said something like, I don't feel like I'm going to get shanked. And then after I said it, I was like, oh, wait, that's actually a thing that happened. And there was a discussion that went on about how the land can hold trauma too, you know, and that now this land, because we don't have a conscious society of people or culture here that said, oh, we all need to come together and create some sort of ritual to build a social acknowledgement of the land being healed, right? We just reacted to the trauma, and then it was too much, too soon, too fast, and then we didn't integrate it properly because it was a big thing until it wasn't a thing, and then some other big thing came in to fill our normal mindset through, you know, media propagation of ongoing interest into whatever's there on the news, I mean, to continue participating in what they offer you. And so it left itself as this unaddressed trauma. And in the psychology, we have what we see is that in post-traumatic stress disorder, the initial trauma or the initial painful experience repeats itself. So in people who have explicit memory of trauma, that might come as nightmares or, you know, random, you know, hallucinatory episodes or whatever it might be, or a triggering that comes up when somebody says something and all of a sudden you're feeling all these emotions, but they're actually inappropriately placed within context. They're expressions of this traumatic stress disorder. But that in the land, we see this too. So I go into that place, and after a certain hour, I mean, a lot of it culturally too is everyone's like, oh, you know, it's not the safest place after dark necessarily, and the police closed down the park, and there was a time there that they even patrolled to make sure people weren't there after dark and stuff. And so it's like this land has an air of something violent is going to happen. And so you walk into that land, and in yourself, if you identify with a victim, you're going to be worried that you're going to get hurt. And then if you don't identify as the victim and you're there and you're also unconscious, you might accidentally get swept up in the trauma of the land and things repeat themselves. And so I'm really pushing some boundaries here, I imagine, to just talk about this idea that I had last night, but to see how post-traumatic stress can manifest in the people as a manifestation of it being held in the land. Like another friend of mine was recently talking about how negative something that the terrorist attacks in France has affected them. They don't even live in Paris. They haven't lived there for years and years. But it's like it exists inside of them. And I had said that it's because you are an expression of that land, and that land was hurt. Mm-hmm. And so you feel it because that it's you in a way, you know, like physically, that's where your primary microbiome and the basic template for your biology was established in response to the microbiology of that land. You are resonant with it as much as it might be years. And also psychologically, that's the foundation of who you are is there. And so when the land is hurt, we're hurt. And in order to move through that, we can hold space for the land, the way that we can hold space for another person expressing their trauma and be with them, be with the land and feel the feels, even though they're uncomfortable. And in doing so, kind of take the lid off the pressure cooker and let things come up and be integrated. Now, I don't know if it's explicit within permaculture, but I imagine that given that you've described that on the permaculture journey, it becomes necessary to deal with, to deal with the garbage. That's not to say it's invaluable, but to deal with the stuff, the waste now that we haven't properly decomposed and recycled or like put back in, that's just kind of hanging around. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily in permaculture, but in your community, what has been things that you've leaned towards as ways to help people through this process? And how could you formulate those helps into tips or suggestions for listeners who might be coming up against this very issue right now?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I would say has exponentially helped me, and I think it started with Evolver when we were involved in Evolver, but it moved into something a little bit deeper, was a community council that I've been a part of. And I've been a part of two different ones, and one has been a little bit deeper and the other one has been a little bit more casual. And so depending on where you are in your life path, you might choose one or over the other. But one of the circles was embedded in nonviolent communication practice, which is basically the taking of ownership for our own emotions and helping to let go of some of the blaming and the shaming, and that kind of is embedded in our culture. And so a lot of it would involve there would be someone holding space always who was not doing the practice, so that it was safe, and that there was someone always kind of watching to make sure if we needed to take a break or needed to kind of rest for a minute, or one person needed more help or something like that. But you'd be in pairs often and practicing just expressing what you're observing, what you're feeling, what are your needs, and what your requests are. So it's like learning as a culture to first and foremost, like really tap into what it is that we need and how to ask for that. And it's amazing how when you ask someone what they need, it's like, what do you need? I don't actually know what I need. So a big piece of this supportive process is for us as individuals, and that's a big piece of permaculture, is self-responsibility, is to look within ourselves and to actually think about what is it that we need. When I'm feeling angry, frustrated, I'm feeling grief, or I'm really excited and happy, any kind of emotion that I might be feeling, that I'm feeling triggered within inside of me, that's triggering some sort of need that's not being fulfilled. So it's going through these kinds of practices of learning how to find out what that is and ask for it that is really healing. But you have to do that in a supportive environment, especially while you're learning how, because it's kind of bumpy, right? Because I don't always know how to express myself yet, or how to really understand what it is that I feel like I'm lacking in my life. And a lot of it, a lot of these needs that we have are actually linked to some of those things that have happened to us when we're children, or happened to those previous 7 generations behind us that have created patterns in our current paradigm or our current life. So that's one piece that really has supported me. So that one-on-one kind of nonviolent communication practice in a community setting. And some of the questions that we asked each other were like, what are you ashamed of? And you have to sit there for 2 minutes and just like speak openly about what you're ashamed of to someone else, which is like one of the scariest things that you might ever do. But also when you're then faced with, the other person has to then reflect back what they heard you say. And often when that reflection comes back to you, you realize how in some ways it's kind of ridiculous, like what you've been feeling. You're like, oh, like it validates it, but it also kind of devalidates it in a sense of allowing you to sort of let it go a little bit more. Because and you also hear when someone else says all the things that they're ashamed of, that, oh, we actually maybe have a lot of the same things that we both are feeling are kind of mirrored. And so you realize I'm not alone in the way that I'm feeling. I'm not alone in the experiences that I've been having. And not only that, but it's okay for me to actually let this all go, with the recognition that I'm actually going to move forward in my life in maybe a slightly different way. So for example, if your shame is, I used to drink a lot and whatever, it's like, oh, well, I don't drink anymore. And I'm not abusive when I drink or whatever anymore. And you can kind of move on from that and say, that was my past. That's not who I am now. I'm breaking that pattern. So a lot of it is about bringing it up to the surface, recognizing it, releasing it with compassion, and then creating a new pattern of how am I going to move forward from this moment. So that was quite pivotal for me in the moving through the healing. A lot of stuff got brought up through that process, like some of the more painful things in my life that I hadn't yet faced. But I moved through it fairly quickly. And the community that was developed around this group has held really strong, and we've continued to stay in each other's lives in a really powerful way. The other council that I was a part of, or have been a part of, and still continues to happen, is much more casual. We're just getting together once a month, and we have different facilitators every time. And each facilitator is bringing forward something that they feel they have to offer to the group, but with kind of this platform of whatever the skills, tools, or offerings I'm bringing are in relation to this transitional time that we're in. So it could be anything. Like we did vision boards once. Another one that's coming up is re-earthing. So Joanna Macy, she's an amazing woman, and John Seed, they work together. But re-earthing is kind of just like, again, that reconnection to the earth, and how can we learn to feel and receive what nature is offering to us in a more connected way. So it could be anything like that. And, you know, we've done shamanism and drumming journeys and things like that in that group. So all different tools from a multitude of different people in the community to kind of help us through our process. Meditation has been huge for me. Yoga has been really huge for me. And sometimes just allowing myself to feel whatever I'm feeling. So most days I'm really excited to get out of bed and to go and do the work and be in the community and teach and share. And some days I just need to be with my grief. And that can also be a scary thing. And I recommend for anyone who is feeling grief, like I'm very empathic. And so when I talk about feeling from nature, or I feel like I say Mama Gaia, I really do feel that on a pretty deep, intense level sometimes. And it can bring up a lot. So it's important for me, I've learned to just honor what it is that I'm feeling and recognize it's going to be over soon. So some days it's like a full day where I just need to cry a lot. And I've developed a community around that too. So I have a roommate at home, and I'm honest with her when I'm having one of those days, and I try not to necessarily bring that into her field too much, but I just let her know where I'm at. And then she knows that if I'm decide to put myself into my room and be by myself, that I'm making a responsible decision that is right for me, but I also will ask for support when I need it. So there's times when, no, I don't want to go through that alone today, and I can call on her or a few other friends to just be there with me in those moments. So I've developed within myself a compass to know, like, okay, I'm actually just having a really healthy release right now. And this is the way that feels right for me to deal with it. So checking in with yourself and saying, I always say this to my one friend, are you running away or are you running to? When you go and you put yourself in your room, are you running to yourself to really deepen into the feelings that you're having and work through them? Or are you running away from yourself and trying to hide away from what's coming forward for you? And if you're running away, that's when you need to reach in and work through that fear and ask for support from your community. So I think at the basis of all of these different techniques is really building a strong foundation of a community around you. In permaculture, we say find the others. So find the people. It is important to be diverse and to reach out into the broader community for certain things, but it is equally as important to find the people that you feel you really connect with. Like James, you spoke of the relationship that you and I had and how it catalyzed you. Well, it did the same thing for me too. My relationship with you helped to catalyze and to propel me forward on my path. And without each other, I mean, I'm sure we would still be doing great things, but I feel like we could do better things. And so if we can build that strong foundation of a community around us, not only do we have that support to work through some of these more gritty, yucky, darker issues. I don't even like to think of them as yucky. I just think of them as bumpy, I guess, because I think it's really valuable to go through that. But we also have the support to step into our own personal power and to step into the gift that we can share. And the more that we're open to going through these darker processes, I believe the more, in a healthy way, I'll state that, the more likely we are to step into being able to shine.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely agree. A lot of my work with this podcast actually, and some of my writing is to empower people to understand and engage that going through the darkness in a healthy way, that allows you to, or us to, shine a little bit more brightly. And this comment you made about asking, are you running to yourself or running away from yourself, and checking in about that, reminds me of this one portion of a song from the Avett Brothers that I think about anytime that topic comes up. And I'm not fully a singer, but the part of the song goes, so when you run, make sure you run to something and not always from, 'cause lies don't need an aeroplane to chase you anywhere. So I think, yeah, anyways, any excuse I have to sing that little portion of the Avett Brothers song, I take. So now I'm curious, as we're kind of trailing to the last several minutes that we have here, when we had our preliminary chat on the phone the other day, you really excitedly talked about an advanced permaculture training that you recently took, and we had discussed the idea of social permaculture. So we've definitely gone beyond, throughout the course of this interview, the basic premise of what permaculture is, and anyone who's kind of savvy or didn't know would immediately assume it has something to do with gardening or working with land. But there's so much more to it, which has become obvious throughout the course of this discussion. But can you go into what is social permaculture and some of the things that were real takeaways for you from this most recent advanced training that we talked about previously?
Sure. Yeah. So we actually, in the course, we actually did have a talk about what is social permaculture. And we were with, throughout the month that I was away, I was in the UK doing a planetary permaculture pilgrimage, and we did 3 different courses. I'll just kind of preface it so that when I refer to it, you understand, everyone knows what I'm talking about. So the first course I did was a teacher training with Rosemary Morrow and Luby McNamara, and then I did a resiliency, design for disaster training with Rosemary Morrow, and then we did a 5-day social permaculture course that was actually with 5 different facilitators. So Rabina McCurdy, Robin Clayfield, Luby McNamara, Starhawk, and Peter Cow. So, and I actually, sorry, I forgot, with the teacher training, Chris Evans was also one of our facilitators. A lot of the foundation of all 3 of the courses were embedded in this people care ethic. So I'm glad that we spent some time discussing it. So I'll leave that kind of to the side, but just bringing that forward. It was a lot about how can we reach communities most in need. And I think at the heart of social permaculture, it is that people care ethic is held, because we have started to notice in permaculture that there hasn't been quite enough of an emphasis on that. But it goes beyond that too. It's really a lot about community building. And again, I mentioned governance, economic systems, and how we can create alternative or more diverse economic systems. Education is a big one, specifically surrounding accessible education, and then land access as well is another piece of social permaculture. So there's these kind of 5 elements that come into the play. And during the course, we talked a lot about how can we bring this into the greater world, because it's something that is often missed or superseded. And I've noticed that it has been becoming much more available, I guess, to the people. So, for example, Scott Pittman and Larry Santoyo, who are another 2 of my elders that I've learned from, they teach 2 full days of, we call it invisible structures as well as social permaculture. So if I bounce back and forth, of invisible structures in their course, because they realize it's really important. Whereas a lot of other courses will wash over it and talk about it for a half a day or for an hour. So I think that piece is coming in a lot stronger, and we put a lot of focus on it in our permaculture design course too. We kind of weave it through the whole thing. So the course that I took in the UK, it brought in a lot of different perspectives of what social permaculture is, and we had a lot about group processes and how do we learn to get along with each other and work through some of the more challenging pieces in some of these group processes that we're having. So the permaculture emphasis, so let's say you're in a normal board meeting. If you're in a pretty traditional standard board meeting, you might be, 5 people or 10 people sitting in a circle, and it kind of is like this is what we're talking about now. This is what we're talking about now. And it kind of moves through, and it's a little bit square or a little bit hard or whatever. I don't know how to explain it, but kind of, it's pretty like firm, I guess. Whereas in permaculture, let's say you're going through the process and someone has an emotional thing come up or whatever, it's like, well, we're going to address that. We're not going to say, oh, sorry, that's not on the agenda. We need to move forward. We're going to address that, and we're going to bring it forward in a way that we can move through it. And so I think that's where permaculture, again, is kind of different than the standard way of interacting with each other. And through that, then we can build a really strong platform for real work to happen, for real community to be built, and for more beautiful and amazing projects to flourish too, because there's a way of being able to honor what each person is going through, what each person has to bring to the table, and so on. So that's kind of like the group processes thing. So there's a variety of different techniques, which I won't have time to get into, but that's around that piece. And so Robin Clayfield, and Rabina and Luby were kind of like the stakeholders in that piece and bringing that forward. Another piece is mentorship, and this kind of goes into education and open sourcing education and making it more viable and accessible for people. So learning tools, and with GaiaCraft, which is a guild that I'm a part of, we've been creating all of these open source learning tools that people can just access anytime they want. And I'll send the information to you, James, for people to download from our website if they want to. And then Robin Clayfield has also been a key piece in creating a lot of these different learning tools, and David Holmgren and a few other people. But another piece that came from Robin Clayfield was this mentorship piece. And one of the things that she said, it just like struck me really deep. We were doing a day on re-indigenizing, I guess, essentially, or reconnecting with our Indigenous roots. And Robin talked about mentorship and how she came into eldership in her community in Australia. And one of the things she said was, it doesn't matter how old you are, we need to reach in and find the elder inside. And we need to share that. We need to start being elders right now. We need to connect with our inner elder and just mentor people wherever we're at whatever level we're at. And that is actually something that permaculture really ignited within me, was this idea of sharing what I know when I know it, and not waiting until I'm like this, I've been practicing permaculture for 30 years. Now it's okay for me to teach. It's actually like, well, actually, I know this now. I feel this really strongly in my core, this one element of permaculture, these 5 elements of permaculture, whatever it might be. And now I'm going to go out and share that with my greater community and with anyone, like any one person that comes and shows this passion or excitement for creating a better world. How can we mentor them and hold them and support them into this leadership role that I think a lot of people are craving and that we're missing in our society? Governance is also a big piece. So learning how we can have ethical leadership where everyone's voices get to be heard. And so there's a lot of there's sociocracy. I don't have time to explain all of them, but there's sociocracy. There's consensus decision making. There's do-ocracy, which I really love, which is like, if you have an idea, then go for it and we'll support you. Like, if you're willing to do the work and you're willing to make that happen, then the community supports you. And they get to kind of be in charge and take the leadership over the decisions in that particular project. But the decision-making and the governance in permaculture is a lot more empowering and activating. And Starhawk talked a lot about power, social power, and how we gain social power. And the 2 ways that you can gain it is by being given to you, or by having power over other people and kind of dominating until you get that power. And in permaculture, it's really about gaining that social power. So creating a social, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically social equity in your community, creating and building trusting foundational relationships, and then having your community say, I really trust you, James. I want you to be in charge of this particular piece of our community because I know you, because I trust you, because you've shown me that you can do this kind of thing. And so then we're given that leadership through the work that we do and through having that strong connection to our values and to our ethics. And then that creates a really strong, trusting, connective community with each other. So it's looking at governance in a completely different way. It's not one person overseeing a million people, someone you've never met before, and you have to just all of a sudden give them all of your trust. It's actually just saying, no, I've developed this connection with you. And so therefore you're the key holder for this particular piece of of what we're creating together. Economy, alternative or complementary currencies. So like local currency, for example, there's trade and barter, time bank, gifting is a big one. And in permaculture, we try to see that we have all levels and a complete balance between all of these different types of currency, including national currency, because it is still embedded in our society now. And through having that diverse amount of different forms of being able to trade, of being able to exchange with each other, then we can create something much more resilient. So for example, we are having economic failure in many different ways. And that economic failure is crushing people and crushing what am I trying to say? It's crushing countries, I guess it would be the best way of saying it. Greece just went through a huge economic failure, for example. And that is making people realize that we need to have different ways of exchanging with each other. And hopefully some of us can start creating those different ways of exchange before the failure comes, so that we can have that resiliency that's kind of holding us together. Mm-hmm. And then the biggest piece of this social permaculture training was the reaching communities of need. And this was actually throughout the whole month that I was away, was, the refugees are a big deal right now. How does permaculture address that? And, working with Starhawk again, she works a lot in communities that are going through this kind of decolonization practice that I talked about earlier. And how do we address that? How do we bring permaculture to marginalized populations? Because one of the things we talked about is that permaculture really reaches privileged communities. I think Starhawk said 80% of people who take permaculture courses are from populations of privilege. So some of the big questions that were coming up for us that we didn't totally have all the answers to, but was like, how do we move beyond our privilege? How do we take permaculture and put it into the hands of those marginalized populations? Rosemary Morrow is doing that work in a really beautiful way. Like, she's practicing permaculture in jails. She's been to all of the war-torn countries, bringing permaculture to people. She's really amazing. She said that sometimes what she does is she'll completely modify the whole permaculture design certificate course to have it not be on a focus of land if she's in a place where people don't have land, right? Sometimes she goes to countries where people don't even have access to land. So she'll modify the entire permaculture course so that it can reach people, so that it's really addressing how they can practice permaculture in their lives and how they can start to embed this into their culture and into their society. So it's looking at how can we reshape the way that we bring this to the world so that it's accessible to all populations of need, because that is at the core of what we're doing. And we have been doing it, but we haven't been doing it to the full capacity. So a big piece of the social permaculture course was not only about how are we practicing social permaculture, but how can we practice social permaculture and permaculture as a whole so that it's more doing what it's meant to do, I guess, is the best way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kym, thank you so much for being on the podcast and for offering us such wonderful insights and a really awesome look into the current complexities of and potentials of permaculture as a practice of so much more than gardening. I know that you run a company, you are a teacher, and the company you run is called Kym Chi. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And then I'm also a part of the guild GaiaCraft.com. So a lot of the teaching comes through my company, but also through GaiaCraft.
Cool. Well, is there any other links or means to connect with you that you'd like to offer the listeners?
No, I think those two are the best ways to connect with me. And yeah, all of our courses and offerings are up on our website. So it's good.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Kym. Have yourself an absolutely wonderful day.
Okay. Thanks, James.
And to everyone else who is now having taken part in yet another episode of ATTMind Radio, thank you for listening. And please check Kym out. Add her to Facebook. Check out Kym Chi and GaiaCraft. Please, if you like the podcast, head over to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you follow your podcasts. Subscribe. Leave us a rating, a comment would be super helpful. And just absolutely have yourself a wonderful day. Take care. Bye. Hey everyone, James here. This podcast and all of my writing is a passion project and brought to you by, well, you. If you believe in the value of what I'm offering, there's a few ways to support, such as following me on social media like Twitter or YouTube, or even just by telling a friend. Word of mouth goes a long way. If you really like what I'm offering and want to bring your support to the next level, please consider donating to the podcast via PayPal or Patreon, or you could buy a copy of one of my books. Head over to jameswjessup.com/support to find out more details. And thanks. If it wasn't for you, I couldn't do what I do.